My parents tried to sell my home for my brother's wedding. I took control. My parents tried to sell my home for my brother's wedding. I took control and fought back and reclaimed my life. I am 35 years old. Recently bought my first home, marking a major life milestone. After years of diligent work and careful budgeting, I was able to finally afford a cozy place of my own. It's hardly a mansion, but it's ideal for me. A quiet retreat in a nice area. It felt great to have a property that was really mine, and it was a result of all my preparation and hard work. My parents, bless them, were ecstatic when I told them. They immediately offered to help with some small renovations, which I found to be quite amazing. They maintained that it was how they celebrated this new phase of my life and offered support. I nodded, picturing nothing significant, perhaps some new paint here, some landscaping there. However, my folks, well, they went overboard. Their beneficial visit soon turned into a regular event. They always brought a new visitor, whether it was an old woman from down the street, an acquaintance, or a distant relative. My house seemed to have become the local tourist destination. I dismissed it, but I thought it was a little over the top. They had great pride in me, especially since my younger brother Michael, 32 meters, was always the golden child. They also enjoyed showing off family accomplishments. Even though he is 3 years younger than Michael, he has always drawn the most attention. He got everything he desired as a child. They would get Michael the deluxe edition of the game system if he desired one. He used all of their credit cards to buy expensive clothing. My brother was always given preference. Even though I adore him, Michael recently became engaged to his fiancée, who lacks the royal income but has comparable upscale tastes. I barely listened to my parents as they talked about how the wedding costs were rapidly getting out of hand. It made sense that they were determined to make his day one to remember. Then strange things began to occur. All of a sudden, my folks started asking me about my house's worth, my outstanding mortgage, and if I had ever thought about refinancing. It seemed odd, but I didn't give it much thought. I assumed they were just interested, because they had never before expressed interest in my financial situation. A week later, they invited me to join them for dinner and requested me to bring my property and mortgage documentation. Even though it looked completely useless, likely due to security concerns, I consented because I didn't want to cause any trouble. I should have been more suspicious. Looking back at this point, I began to hear strange remarks from my neighbors. They'd mention in passing that they saw a picture of a house just like mine online. Puzzled, I brushed it off as a coincidence. Then I received an email from a friend that included a link to a real estate listing. I have pictures of the inside of my house. The pictures were taken during the remodeling projects. My parents had been working on it, and I didn't know how or why my house was up for sale. My froze, equipped with indisputable proof, the real estate listing with images taken within my home. I went up against my parents. They had to stop playing dumb. They initially attempted to minimize it by saying they were only looking into possibilities in case I ever made the decision to sell. I didn't believe it. I wanted a direct response. Why would they list my house without contacting me? The truth was revealed at last. In order to assist pay for Michael's ideal wedding, my parents acknowledged listing the house. They said it was all for family happiness, and that since I had fulfilled my dream of home ownership, Michael should also be able to fulfill his. Talked constantly about how my house's equity could enable him to have the wedding of his dreams and how he deserved it. My parents genuinely believed they had a voice in how my house may be used just because they had assisted with certain upgrades. It was astounding how entitled they were. I was quite clear that my house was not for sale and that Michael's extravagant wedding was definitely not being funded by a bank. They wouldn't let it go though. They used every tactic in the book, including emotional blackmail, guilt trips, and even bringing up past actions they had taken for me. They accused me of prioritizing money over family and recalled how much they had given me as a child. They saw my refusal to sell the house as a rejection of both Michael's happiness and the family as a whole. I remained steadfast. I restated that the house was not for sale and that they had gone too far. Then Michael himself gave the call. He was crying, upset and angry, as he called me selfish and accused me of spoiling his wedding. He claimed that given everything the family had done for me over the years, I had no right to pass up this one thing to him, even as it hurt. I persisted. I clarified that I didn't need to sell my home in order to finance his ideal wedding. I told a few close pals about the entire affair. Even though I was astonished, they helped me right away and told me that I had every right to defend my home. They encouraged me to stand my position and reminded me that my family's behavior was very inappropriate. Word got around the family fast and opinions differed among some family members. Sympathized with me and thought it was ridiculous that my parents had listed my house without my consent. Others, on the other hand, supported my parents and said that in order to maintain family unity I should make concessions. I felt like I had suddenly turned into the antagonist in this twisted story. Because I refused to give up my house for a wedding, my parents gave me an ultimatum. A few days later I had to sell the house willingly, or face the condemnation of the entire family. They were very explicit that if I didn't comply, I would be effectively disowned. It was strange to hear my own parents discuss such a tough decision for a wedding that in reality had nothing to do with me. My fiancé Thomas, 37 million, has been my pillar of support. During this entire ordeal, he has always understood me in a way that my family has never been able to, and we have been together for a number of years. He was incensed on my behalf when I told him all that was going on, but he also gave me some clarity on what I needed to do next. In contrast to Michael's extravagant wedding, we had been planning our own, but we wanted a small, private ceremony. My grandfather William, 77 million, is one individual who has supported me over this entire ordeal. He has consistently criticized my parents for their partiality and has never been a big fan of Michael. We have a unique bond. He claims that I make him think of his late wife. My grandma. Naturally, Michael tries to argue that mom loves him more, but I don't often see him. Because he lives across the nation, he really is a pampered brat. When Michael received his football scholarship years ago, I learned that my parents had actually provided him with the funds to purchase a car and a house. They never gave me any money for my schooling. They said my college fund had been used for post-fire bills at Michael's university. When I questioned them about it, Michael lived in luxury while I had to work through college and take out student loans. That's when I understood I needed legal advice. I called a lawyer and gave them the full rundown. The lawyer suggested a few safety measures. Even though it would be illegal for my family to sell my house without my consent, I should make sure that no locks would let anyone enter without my consent in the event that my parents attempted additional intervention. They also advised protecting any valuables and private papers. I changed the locks and secured my documents right away as they had advised. However, my parents didn't stop there. They began venting their frustrations on social media shortly after our altercation. In their lengthy theatrical post, they claimed that I had turned my back on the family and was egotistically holding on to money that could help my brother realize his ambitions. They painted me as some cold-blooded villain, which led to a barrage of remarks from close friends and distant relatives, the majority of whom were unaware of the full context. Thomas provided the most surprising assistance. We have been covertly organizing our own wedding, and in spite of the mayhem, we desire something little but significant, surrounded by those who genuinely care about us. Thomas said that until everything is set up, we might not want to inform my family. They might attempt to ruin it or make it into another Michael drama. Considering their history, I'm caught between wanting to protect myself and my future and loving my family. As I write this, I won't allow the house to be taken away for someone else's ostentatious wants because it symbolizes everything I've worked for. However, the ongoing stress and emotional blackmail is wearing them down. I realize I'm correct, but there are moments when it seems like the hardest thing in the world to defend oneself against family. My grandfather and I are meeting with him tomorrow to talk about our wedding arrangements. He is the one person in my family who I really trust, and I am very grateful for his support. Whatever my folks throw at me next, I only hope I'll have the fortitude to maintain my position. First update: 3 weeks have passed since my last post, so I need to give you an update on my life. My family's position has gotten worse. And expected ways. My parents eventually took down my house's real estate listing after I sent a cease and desist letter via my attorney. But their response was anything but contrite. They accused me of legal and called the letter a betrayal. Refusing to back down, they asserted that needless family conflict was being caused by my selfish refusal to assist with Michael's wedding. That letter turned out to be the decisive factor that caused us to drift farther apart. My mother bemoaned how I had turned against them, saddened that I would put money above love, but instead of accepting responsibility, they stepped up their social media campaign, posting dramatic updates that portrayed me as the monster driving the family apart over just money. The posts were sufficiently ambiguous to deceive anyone unaware of the true circumstances. Family, friends, and distant relatives soon started praising them in their comments. Some even sent me direct messages that were full of scorn and criticism. Michael made the decision to confront me directly just when I felt things couldn't get much worse. He arrived at my house without warning. Fury, I had no right to keep my house to myself when the family required it for something as significant as his wedding, he claimed, adding that it had always been family property and that I was jealous of his happiness. Refusing to fall for the plot, I remained composed and restated my determination to sell the house. I bought it with my own hard-earned money, thus it was legally mine. He walked off, apparently much more enraged by that. The following day, my parents called with more expectations. They insisted that I grant them a sizable loan as I wasn't prepared to sell the house as a family. They contended that I owed it to them in whatever way I could because the wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event. Remaining calm, I declined. They had nothing to do with me and their demands were totally inappropriate in reaction. They severed all communication with me. They stopped asking me to family get-together, and I soon started getting complaints from other family members that I had alienated them. It was obvious that my parents were attempting to keep me apart in the hopes that I would give in to their pressure. Although I am deeply saddened my close friends have supported me, they never stopped telling me that I'm doing the right thing, and I don't know how I would have remained resolute without their help. The real estate agent who had previously come to my house called me a few days earlier. I couldn't get rid of the sensation that this wasn't over, even though they acknowledged that my parents had finally removed the listing after receiving the cease and desist letter. One evening at home, I observed that my hair seemed different, which confirmed my fears. I could tell they were tampered with. Although it was subtle at first, I thought someone had broken in. Maybe as a reprisal for the legal letter, I hired a locksmith right away to replace all of the locks. I couldn't take any chances after everything that had transpired. I didn't want to think that my own family could be this bad. But I'm beginning to notice everything. I've begun therapy in order to get through the emotional turmoil this familial betrayal has left behind. I uncover layers of manipulation and shame in each session that I was unaware they were hurting me. I'm learning from the therapist how deeply embedded these family relationships are and how crucial it is to set limits even inside the family in private. Thomas and I have proceeded with our wedding preparations. Having at least one family member who genuinely supports us is great, and my grandfather William is helping us organize everything. We're organizing something little but significant, exactly what we both desire. There is no greater difference between Michael's extravagant approach and ours. Observing my parents continuing their slander campaign within the extended family has been the most difficult aspect of all of this, as they are creating a story in which I am the egotistical daughter who cares more about money than keeping the family together. As soon as the word got out, I started getting letters from relatives I hadn't seen in years, all of whom were disappointed and accused me of ruining family unity. I've begun recording every conversation I have with Michael, my parents, and any other family members who get in touch. I want a detailed record of everything said and done in case the situation erupts again. I also feel more in control of the issue when I keep a record, as if I'm finally taking proactive measures to adequately protect myself. I'm discovering that my resolve is getting stronger despite the pandemonium. Every story they circulate and every attempt to guilt trip me simply serves to reinforce the fact that I made the right choice. I will not allow anyone to ruin the life I have meticulously crafted for myself, not even my family. I'll provide another update as soon as I have more information to give, but Thomas and I are proceeding with our preparations. Your support matters more than you can imagine, so thank you all. Second update since my last update, which was months ago. Everything has changed. Yes, I married Thomas last weekend. Without telling Michael or my parents, I must tell you what transpired. Just our closest friends, Thomas's family and my grandfather William, who proudly escorted me down the aisle, attended our lovely small ceremony. He was so happy for us that he was glowing when others asked me where my parents were. I just said they had to go to Michael's game. Grandfather was apprehensive about our concealment at first, but he was totally on board with us. A storm was building as we got back from our short honeymoon. Totally disconnected before I could even unlock my phone, I was inundated with notifications primarily from Michael and my mother. Michael was calling me names and using profanity. It seems that my aunt made a crude jab at my parents' absence by sharing wedding photos on Facebook. Everyone in their little community started denouncing them for how they had treated me when the post went public. As it happens, my grandfather even visited my parents and expressed his thoughts to them. This appears to have been the last straw for my dad. He ultimately confronted my mother and to file for divorce if she didn't make amends, because he was so angry about missing my wedding and his own father's criticism. My parents' text first expressed wrath before changing to beg and plead. I'm getting a lot of flack from my mom's sisters and friends since I didn't say it was my wedding. Many of my family members, including those I didn't invite, have expressed regret, claiming they were unaware of the dire circumstances at home. To be honest, though I don't believe it, I did disclose my impending marriage to my parents. I gave them an invitation on paper just like everyone else. A few members on Thomas's side, my parents, Michael, and a few distant relatives did not send out RSVPs. I followed up with everyone else, and they all replied. Those who did not RSVP said they were unable to attend. My brother and mother ignored me when I texted them. I deliberately didn't give the precise day because I knew about Michael's game. They would tell me to quit being a bother and that other things were more important. Each time I attempted to bring up the wedding. In retrospect, I guess I should have quit right away. The effort was not worth it. I didn't hide my marriage, I just didn't point it out to them in the hopes that they would be taken aback and perhaps even a little interested in. My aunts and uncles did hear me mention the wedding. Sometimes mom would even be in the room. "That's nice, dear," she would remark with a smile before straying from the subject. I attempted to keep my distance from them after high school, college and graduate school, but they would always guilt trip me and bring me back by pointing to my mom's sisters and grandparents. Maybe it's because Thomas is with me now that this time feels different. I am stronger and more self-assured, but I still need to make a decision. It has been quite hectic. The majority of Dad's family lives on the other side of the nation. As I already stated, I wasn't really sure how they felt about me for a very long time. I stayed in contact with Dad's side of the family, but I never brought up the abuse again. I tried to let them know how my parents were treating me when I was 14 years old. My grandfather, uncles and aunts all said them. However, I was chastised so badly when I went home that I convinced myself that I had made it up. The only person who knew was grandfather. He was constantly worried that I would get resentful of him if he attempted to intervene in the fact that I currently reside in a different town than my parents, should be noted. In fact, they hardly even know my current address. Michael once attempted to break into my old flat in order to steal money. In fact, my mother defended him by stating siblings share things. Since then I've moved there. Little Settlement was about an hour away from the city where I used to reside. In relation to my cousin, it was she who brought up the fact that my dad's absence at my wedding was a major issue for him. They chastised my cousin for turning her back on family over a minor incident and eventually cut her off. I sent my dad a message expressing my desire to meet with him, my mother, and Michael at a neutral location. The next day he immediately replied that he agreed. My dad's brother and sisters are joining us in a park where we're congregating, probably to prevent any harm. My dad looked awful, as he has been for days. For the time being, I'm concentrating on enjoying my new life with Thomas, even though I know I'll need to make some decisions regarding my connection with my family in the future. We are eager to start a new chapter in our lives together, free from the manipulation and turmoil that have characterized my past. Third update. The last update was 1 month ago. Although nobody anticipated it, the park encounter I mentioned, it ended up being a pivotal moment. I'm at last prepared to talk about what transpired and how I finally took charge of my life. When I got to the park, I could feel the tension. Michael was unable to keep eye contact with my mother, was wearing her typical self-righteous expression, and my father was defeated. I had my own intentions, but my dad's siblings were there ostensibly as mediators. My lawyer, On rapid dial, a folder of documented proof and an unshakable resolve to put an end to this on my terms were the three things I carried with me. I put a heavy folder on the park bench between us before anyone could say anything. This is every text, email, social media post, and court document demonstrating your attempts to steal my house, I said. Opening the folder. Evidence of financial fraud is also included. I gave my mom my full attention. Do you recall those college fund records? You said were destroyed in a fire. Copies were kept by grandfather. It's interesting how that money got up in Michael's accounts. Of my mother's face lost its color. Michael began to object, but I interrupted him. I'm not done yet. I also have surveillance footage and other records of your attempted break-in at my previous flat, not to mention that my house locks have recently been tampered. I raised my hand when my father attempted to apologize. I came here not to apologize, I come to explain to you exactly what will occur next. I produced a paper that included compound interest calculations and a list of all the items they had taken from my college fund. You may either give back all of the money you took from my education fund and handed it to Michael plus interest, or I'll file charges for financial fraud. Attorney has everything prepared in an attempt to keep things under control. My mother sneered. You wouldn't risk it. We are related, I chuckled. Is when you attempted to take my house, you forfeited your ability to refer to us as family, but let me go on. Also, I'm requesting a restraining order against each and every one of you. There is strong evidence of emotional abuse and break-in attempts. At last Michael was able to. This cannot be done to us. How? About my wedding? Your N. And I said, all right, Michael, let me tell you about weddings. I was recording every threat, every deceptive message, and every attempt to steal my stuff while you were organizing your lavish celebration. This issue is especially intriguing to the law company I hired, which focuses on family financial abuse. I went to my parents. Additionally, the firm found several intriguing anomalies in your financial data. The IRS appears to be quite interested in certain tax-related matters, particularly those involving gifts to Michael that were not properly disclosed. There was silence in the park. Even the noises of kids playing in the distance sounded subdued. On my mom's face had turned ashen instead of pale. It appeared as though my father was ill. This is what's going to happen, I added in a calm, steady voice. Within 72 hours. You will credit my account with the entire sum of my pilfered college fund plus interest. You will stop communicating with my husband, myself, and my close friends and family. You'll take down every social media post that mentions me and refrain from creating any new ones. My attorney will file the restraining order, the fraud charges, and the IRS tip if you break any of these conditions. I looked across at Michael. And you, the golden child role has ended. For you, I have forwarded information about your attempted break-in and the threats that followed to the Human Resources Department of your employer. They were especially curious about how this relates to the ideals of their business. My mother's voice shook, but she managed to get it out. Would you ruin your own family for financial gain? No, I replied to mother. After years of abuse and manipulation, you ruin this family. All I'm doing is making sure you can never harm me again and give me back what you took. I got up and gathered my papers. You have 72 hours. My attorney will be keeping an eye on the move. Everything is filed if it isn't finished, or if any of you try to get in touch with me. Additionally, keep in mind that grandfather has copies of all the original paperwork proving the financial fraud before you think about attempting to challenge this. My father yelled feebly. Lauren, please. I was leaving. I made one final turn around. You had 20 years to say please and 20 years to defend me. You were a father for 20 years. The time is up. The repercussions. The result was just what I had envisioned. The entire sum showing up in my account within 48 hours. All of my mother's social media posts regarding me were removed. Michael was placed on administrative leave by his employer while an internal inquiry was conducted. My grandfather told me that my father eventually filed for divorce, not that we needed it anymore, but Thomas and I upgraded our home security system with some of the refunded funds. Additionally, we made a sizable donation to a charity organization that supports victims of financial abuse in families, making their manipulation into something constructive for other people seemed right. According to my grandfather, who is the only member of my family I still communicate with, my parents' social standing in their little town has completely collapsed. It turns out that people's carefully constructed picture collapsed once they discovered the whole reality, which included years of financial abuse and manipulation. In addition to my wedding, after the company's inquiry exposed Michael's level of dishonesty, his fiancée broke up with him. I won't pretend it doesn't hurt occasionally, but I know I made the right decision every morning when I wake up in my home, which is safe and secure and cannot be taken from me. Thomas and I are currently organizing a lavish honeymoon which will be funded in part by my refunded education funds, using their stolen money to increase my own happiness. Has a certain poetic quality. My accomplishments are currently displayed on a wall in my home office, including my professional certifications, degrees that I earned via hard work, and a framed copy of the final bank transfer that shows the refunded college funds. The money isn't the point. It's about saying enough is enough and ultimately taking a stand. I say this to anybody who could criticize me for being too severe, for not trying to make amends or accept apologies. Forgiveness is a gift, not a duty. Walking away and making sure toxic people can never harm you again is sometimes the strongest thing you can do, despite their attempts to portray me as. Thus, I am not the antagonist in this. This house belongs to me. I'm a lady who at last decided no more. I own my life. I own my future. To pay for a wedding, they intended to steal my house. They actually lost a lot more than that. They lost their social standing and reputation, but more significantly they lost any influence they may have had over me. I'm doing well, and so is Thomas, with friends who genuinely care about us. We have dinner parties in our safe, expensive house since everything started. I've gotten 3 promotions at work, in part because I'm not bearing the emotional weight of their manipulation any longer. Living a good life isn't always the best form of retaliation. Sometimes it's holding those who attempted to harm you accountable. Mom wanted to steer the conversation. Well, she no longer has a story to steer. Michael requested that everything be given to him. He's now learning what it means to deal with the fallout. The passive observer role was what my father desired. Being too helpless to stop it, he got to watch everything fall apart. I finished telling this narrative because I'm ready to move on to the next chapter. Not because there isn't more to tell, one in which I write all the words and nobody else does. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who helped me along the way. Keep in mind that forgiveness and reconciliation aren't always necessary for a happy ending. Sometimes you have to say, never again, and stand your ground.